From fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, this is Pod Therapy. Real people, real problems, and real therapists. If you have any questions you'd like to ask or advice you'd like to give, come on over to podtherapy.net and join the conversation. We're nearing the start of fantasy football season. Let's hope for some civility in this year's league, or this could be the beginning of the end of Pod Therapy. And now, broadcasting from Level 9 Studios, that guy is Dr. Jim Jobin. I'm Nick Tangeman. It's time for some Pod Therapy.
I think you're just bitter that I defeated you for third place last year.
Well, it's funny, that's not how I remember it.
That's exactly what happened, and I will prove it to you. I defeated you for third place. That happened. We had a square off in the finals for third.
Are you saying that my memory is inaccurate?
I'm saying you didn't even know how to play fantasy football.
Are you saying that I'm not in touch with reality?
I see what you're doing. That's an interesting foreshadowing, Nick. Very deep.
More on that later.
Yeah, more on that later. But Nick and I are in a football or fantasy football league together that we play in every year. And every year it has a theme to it. Last year was a Game of Thrones theme. We called the league Game of Throws. And it's really funny because everybody names their team after something that has to do with the league. So I think I was, what was it? Oh, it was like the Winterfell White Walkers or something like that, or the Starks. And Nick doesn't know much about the show. So this was like hot chick dragon lady.
No. It was blonde chicks with huge dragons.
That's it. Yeah, blonde chicks, huge dragons.
It was either, because that's all I know from Game of Thrones. It was
from
either
the commercials.
Yeah, it was either that or One Ring to Rule Them All. That was my backup.
That was your backup, which has nothing to do with the show.
Yes.
This year, so last year, neither Nick nor I won. We battled it out for third place, and I got the consolation prize.
Was it your wife that won?
My wife won, yeah. So my wife ended up beating everybody, and then my buddy's wife came in dead last. And so it's funny because in our league we have trophies. A trophy goes to the winner, and then there's a toilet trophy that goes to the loser that they have to conspicuously place in their life for the entire next season. So at our next draft, she's going to get that. But this year's draft, this year's league, our theme is Disney. And so our league this year is called Turn Down for Walt. And
which was very clever.
Thank you. That was very fun. So Turn Down for Walt, and so everybody has Disney themed team names. Mine is Captain Hook and Ladder. My wife's is Beauty and the Beast Mode, and my father-in-law is Blitz a Small World. And there's some really good ones. Another person's is NFElsa from Frozen, and then her husband is Olaf Sides.
I didn't see that one.
Yeah, it's got the snowman Olaf.
Oh, that's funny.
And then yours was depressing. I saw yours and I was like, what are you doing?
Don't start groaning already.
Tell the folks what it is. What you thought would be a great contribution to our friendly Disney league for fantasy football.
Little Orphan Bambi.
Yeah. It got dark fast. It got dark extremely fast.
Really? Too soon?
Too soon. Yeah, too soon. Yeah. Bambi's barely, recovered from the grieving process.
Believe it or not, my girlfriend Laura talked me out of a lot of them. That was the one that she finally gave up on. It's like, fine, do it.
I want to see what landed on the cutting room floor if Little Orphan Bambi was the one that got to the top. Oh, it was probably pretty dark. Actually, I do want to see those.
This is a good thing to know about therapists, though.
Yeah.
It's like
dark humor.
Because we have to deal with so much real stuff all the time that when we're able to check out, it's like...
Yeah. No, that is true.
We can relax.
It's funny, too, because therapists will give each other gallows humor advice. Like if your buddy calls you and he's another shrink and he's like, I'm going through this. And you're like, well, Mike, if you thought about, killing yourself. Like, so that would really just bring really quick relief to all this. And they're like, thanks, Dick.
That's terrible.
Appreciate it. It's like, we just
maybe your friends do that.
Yeah, this might explain why I don't have very many. Now that I'm thinking about it, everybody in my fantasy football league is a family member.
It's all starting to make sense.
It's all starting to add up. People don't call Jim for advice anymore.
Yeah.
But if you would like to be Jim's client, don't worry. I won't tell you to kill yourself.
Yeah.
I will intentionally talk you out of it, so just know that. But what's hot off the press this week for us, Nick?
So, in today's show, we are going to talk about gaslighting.
Yeah, you hear a lot about this now.
Yeah, which is something that's really interesting because I had not heard of this term until it felt like just recently, like within the last year, and then all of a sudden I'm hearing it all the time.
Yeah.
Which is kind of... which happens in psychology, especially like pop psychology. Like a term will just come into existence, and then all of a sudden everybody's using it.
Yeah. And I think Trump was a big part of this, because I think with Trump's unique style of communication, a lot of people started bringing that word up and saying, hey, this is called gaslighting. And then it became this like phenomenon where everybody was like, hey, you might be getting gaslighted. And am I gaslighting? And so it seems to have caught fire. So I'm glad we're actually going to talk about this.
Okay, so we should explain what gaslighting is.
Sure.
So NBC recently published an article that kind of explains it. And here's what NBC says. Psychologists use the term gaslighting to refer to a specific type of manipulation where the manipulator is trying to get someone else or a group of people to question their own reality, memory, or perceptions. And it's always a serious problem, according to psychologists.
Okay. So that was an NBC article.
Correct.
That's a quote from the article.
Yes.
And that's how they define gaslighting.
Correct.
And they say it's a specific type of manipulation where somebody's trying to get the other to question their recollection of events and therefore the reality of what really happened.
Right.
Okay. It's interesting in that quote because they start with psychologists use the term blah, blah, blah. And they say, according to psychologists at the end. It's like, man, you guys really want us to like take away that psychologists are supporting this. But okay. All right. So that's what gaslighting is according to them. Does the article go a little bit deeper into this? Does it sort of unpack like maybe some examples of what that looks like when you get somebody to question their reality?
Yeah, so it talks a little bit about gaslighting and how it happens in power dynamics and stuff like that, but I want to skip ahead to what it talks about as far as how it happens.
Okay.
So they broke down in this article 5 ways in which gaslighting tends to happen.
Okay.
First one is withholding, which they define as he or she refuses to listen or says they don't understand something.
Okay, so sort of, like whenever you pretend like you don't get what the other person's saying and they feel like they're going crazy trying to explain it to you because they're like, no, I know you understand me. And you're like, no, I don't even get it, like from the get.
When you said empty the dishwasher, I guess I was a little confused. I don't know.
Okay.
Empty. What does it?
So sort of playing dumb. Withholding is playing dumb. Okay.
Is anything ever empty?
Yeah. What? Yeah. It's like arguing with a Buddhist monk.
Right.
The problem is not the dishwasher, Nick. The problem is within. Empty the dishes of your soul, Nick.
Yeah. Okay. And then number 2, countering. So when the abuser questions the gaslighter or gaslightee's memory of an event.
Okay.
Which was kind of what I was doing in the very beginning
with the joke.
Talking about last year's fantasy football.
Am I misremembering this?
It's like,
okay.
Oh, I didn't remember it that way. Is it that's how you remember that? That's strange. It's weird that you remember being, coming in 3rd in that league. I don't remember.
Okay. And it's condescending and sort of like, no, I'm really worried for you. You don't seem to remember this. Are you okay? Okay. All right. Interesting. All right.
Okay. Blocking or diverting. So when the abuser changes the subject or questions the victim's thinking.
Okay. So with that, it sounds like that's sort of the old red herring argument, right? So it's like a decoy. You come at me and you say, Jim, we really need to discuss that you keep leaving stuff all over the kitchen table here, and we've talked about it. And I'm like, yeah? What about Hillary's emails? Or I mean,
Benghazi.
Yeah, so it's a decoy. It's
that could be it. Or instead of actually focusing on the subject, like you were talking about in your example, which was what? I already forgot.
Yeah, the kitchen table thing.
Kitchen table.
Yeah.
Instead of talking about that, we're going to talk about your thinking about the kitchen table or something like that. I think that's kind of where they're going with that.
All right, that's fair.
Yeah. Trivializing is the 4th one, making the victim's needs or feelings seem unimportant.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Self-explanatory. And then the last one, forgetting or denial. So when the manipulator pretends to have forgotten what actually happened or denies something he or she had previously agreed to.
Got it. So which is also playing dumb or just absent-mindedness or different recollection of reality.
Right.
Okay, so the article is saying, hey, gaslighting is this big, huge problem. Psychologists define it this way. It has to do with manipulating people's recollection of events. And it breaks it down into those 5 things and says, so here's like examples of things that might be gaslighting. So if a person thinks they're being gaslighted, the article says, this is how you know, is if they do these things, or is there more to it? Like, how does it kind of land on a definition? I still feel like we don't have like a way to flag it.
And that may be a constant theme throughout this.
Okay.
So they actually go on to have signs that you may be a victim of gaslighting.
Oh, okay. It's kind of Jeff Foxworthy. You
So
might be gaslighted if. Okay.
or a top 10 list.
Okay.
Okay, so for our listeners at home, check these off as we go, because I
Okay.
think this will be interesting. Because
So
Yeah,
you may
be checking all
Maybe
of
you're
these.
getting gaslighted.
Okay.
Check off any of the following.
you're constantly second-guessing yourself or have trouble making decisions.
Okay. Wow.
Check.
Yeah.
You're ruminating about a perceived character flaw, like being too sensitive or not good enough of a person.
I have a big nose, so that's an issue. I think I'm being gaslighted by the mirror.
If you feel confused about your relationship.
Oh, okay.
So if you find yourself thinking, I thought I had this great husband, but I just feel crazy all the time, or I thought I had this charming partner, but then sometimes I feel like I'm losing it when we're together.
Okay.
Those are the examples that they give for that one. Another sign, in confrontation with the person that might be gaslighting you, you feel like you suddenly find yourself in an argument you didn't intend to have. You're not making progress, or you're saying the same thing over and over again and not being heard.
Okay, so to be clear, because this is really vague, like they're saying you might be gaslighted if
Correct.
you feel like your conversations with your partner sometimes turn into arguments. You feel like you're questioning whether or not the relationship's working. You feel insecure about something that's a personality flaw of yours.
Yes.
And you question your own reality.
Now, we still have some more to go.
Okay. Hopefully these get
If
more
you feel-
concrete. Yeah.
Don't hold your breath.
Okay.
If you feel fuzzy or unclear about your thoughts, feelings, or beliefs.
Oh my God. Okay.
If you're always apologizing. If you're frequently making excuses for your partner's behavior.
Okay.
You can't understand why you're not happy with your own life. Or, finally, last one, you know something is wrong, but you just don't know what.
Okay. Wow. So just in case none of those other ones didn't apply to you, which were like horoscope in nature.
Yeah, it was.
Like they
That's
apply
exactly
to everything.
what I was thinking. It was
just in
very-
case the last catch-all is, are you unhappy? You're being gaslighted.
Yeah, that list was very fortune cookie.
I'm not.
think.
All right. So the article was written by NBC. NBC said, hey, this is a very significant thing. It's very important. And they started off with that big quote where they say psychologist twice. They say psychologists tell us that it means this. This is what gaslighting is. And according to psychologists, it's really important. And then they give you like examples. Here are things that you might be doing that are gaslighting. And if you feel any of these ways, you're being gaslighted.
Right. Now, they did cite, they had a couple quotes in here from Dr. Robin Stern, Associate Director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence.
Of course he's from Yale.
Or she, I'm not sure.
No, his name's Robin. Oh, Robin. Not Robert.
Robin.
Of course she's from Yale.
And the author of The Gaslight Effect.
All right, that's it. All right, so yeah, I'm gonna weigh in on this. Okay, a couple of things. So, if you're not familiar with even the phrase gaslighting, actually, it comes from a play, and a lot of people don't know that. And that's what I don't like about this article is like and I think they mentioned it in the article somewhere, but it comes from a play. And there was a play in the 1930s called The Gaslight or Gaslight. And in it, basically, this husband wants to inherit his wife's money. She has this large bank account. He wants it. And so he slowly, deviously manipulates her into losing her sanity, into questioning her reality, subtly moving things, changing recollection of things, and seeming very genuine until he drives her insane. And then he has all the cause he needs to have her locked up in an institution. And then he takes all of her money. And then that play was ultimately turned into a movie in the 1940s. So recently, with this whole new discussion about what is gaslighting, and it came kind of as a result of President Trump, this kind of got reignited. So, all right. I got to pace myself here, Nick, because I got some pretty big beef with everything.
Calm down.
I'm going to take a deep breath. Okay. First thing is this. If you are out there and when you hear these descriptions, you think, I feel like I'm being gaslighted, right? Or I think somebody's doing this to me. I guess what you really mean is that you feel powerless in some relationships and that you feel that other people are being unfair and manipulative to you and that is maddening and frustrating and you would like to confront or change that.
Right.
That paragraph explanation is much more preferable to me than using a label of a make-believe word.
Absolutely.
And that's the problem that I have with gaslighting, is that whenever you get Dr. Robin Stern to come in and say, gaslighting, according to my book, Gaslighting, what it is defined by psychologists like this. No, it's not. Gaslighting is literally the name of a play. It's something that you're writing a book about right now, and you're trying to turn it into a term. It is not a mental health diagnosis. It doesn't come from the DSM-5. And even if it did, even if it's like some subtle shade of gray of some other diagnosis that's actually in there, by the way, which it is not okay because it's a weaponized word. Gaslighting is not a phrase I hear used in sympathy. I don't hear anybody say, hey, my friend Bill, he's really got a bad case of gaslighting, and I'm worried for him.
He's in the hospital right now.
He's in the hospital. Yeah, I really encourage him to go see a therapist. People use this as a weapon. And it's bothersome to me because it's vague, it's all-encompassing, and we're seeing this modern McCarthyism that's happening, where in McCarthyist era, you just throw out the word communist. And you don't even know what that really means. You just kind of vaguely know it means sharing. And so anybody who's even a little bit talking about sharing, you just go, well, you're a communist. And they go, no, I'm not, no crap. And that just ends the debate. It ends the conversation. So gaslighting is this unfortunate mega label that we're throwing on things. And I think it's a weaponized term that, A, has no mental health definition. There is no concurrent science on this. Even the stuff you read about in this NBC article is referencing somebody who literally wrote a book called Gaslighting. She can talk about it, but she's really describing all sorts of interrelational, intercommunication dysfunctions. And my master's is in marriage and family therapy. And I think that's one of the things that really bothers me about gaslighting is that article captures like 10 different ways that you can dysfunctionally communicate.
Right.
And it doesn't appreciate that there's an entire licensed discipline in mental health whose only job is to deal with dysfunctions in couple and family communications, power dynamics, logical fallacies, all this stuff. And to just reduce everything they do and just say, it's gaslighting. You're gaslighting me. So you're the problem. I'm a victim. You're the problem. That's bothersome to me. Because a marriage and family therapist hears that and goes, oh no, there's no such thing as gaslighting, but there's like all these systems that are wrong in this. Let's untangle those, right? But gaslighting is just this label you can throw at people. And in that way, it really bothers me because gaslighting, you remember like 10 years ago, Nick, it was the key phrase was like emotionally abusive. People would say, oh, she's emotionally abusive. He's emotionally abusive. And as a therapist, you hear that and you go, okay, what does that mean? And they're like, they just nod their head and go, you know what it means. You're a therapist. You get it. But he's emotionally abusive. Like that we're going to write that as a diagnosis in our chart. Like, yeah, emotionally abusive.
Well, or even what do you do with it once you have that?
Right.
If you don't have a clear, like in what ways? Because really what we're focusing on is we want to change behavior. Even communication we can say is a behavior.
Right.
So all of this is we want to address the communication. The things that are happening, I think you would agree, are real things.
Yeah. They're dysfunctional patterns of communication.
Right.
And I want to address the action of that.
Right. We have to operationally define
and
what
it
is exactly we're talking about.
The word gaslighting or the phrase emotionally abusive were both equally unhelpful to me as a therapist because they come to how you feel. They don't tell me what he or she is doing. They tell me how you feel. And even in that article, Nick, the end of it was, you might be gaslighted if you feel any of the following. If you question your reality, if you feel insecure, if you feel unhappy, if you feel like your mate gets in arguments with you that you didn't intend to have. That's no other mental health word works like that. There is no word that the definition, the criteria is how other people feel about you. That's not a thing. It always has to do with your stuff. So, and another thing that really bothers me about this, again, is even whenever you were going through the list of withholding was an example and blocking was an example of these things that they call gaslighting behaviors. If you look at that, Nick, that's just a list of logical fallacies. That's all that was. Like if you look up a list of logical fallacies, that's what you see in that. So we already have a phrase to describe what they're calling gaslighting. Gaslighting is essentially using logical fallacies against another human and being wrong and, but being confident about it. So another phrase for gaslighting could just be confidently wrong. And that's a normal thing in humanity. We don't have to diseaseify it with a word. And I think that word, in my opinion, causes more heat than light. Because if you tell me my mate is gaslighting me, so you just use such a big label, you throw a book of words at that person that I don't even know what that means. It has to do with how he makes you feel or how she makes you feel or how your boss makes you feel. And I don't know how to address that. But it gives you a convenient excuse to wash your hands of all the other half of the communication cycle and just tell me the other person's emotionally abusive, the other person's gaslighting me, period. And that's hard for me because I think as a marriage and family therapist background, I think in systems. And a system is not one human, right? That's an individual. I think about the dynamic of how the relationship works. So it's possible that person A is speaking and communicating in dysfunctional, unhelpful ways. Fine. There's an entire field of mental health whose job it is to address and change that. But when we just say it's him, her, gaslighting, period, I read an article on NBC, that it really bothers me. I think it's cheap. I think it's disingenuous. I think it's McCarthyism. I think it's overly vague. It weaponizes a wannabe mental health word. I have a problem with it. So that's my rant.
So, okay. So I'm going to kind of poke the bear a little bit.
Oh, Jesus, don't do it.
Because one thing that kind of stuck out to me, and I want to get your take on this since you have way more experience working within the family and the systems dynamic, is that one of the issues that I have with it is the victimization of the individual. So like when I hear things like, as it talks about in this article, or I've heard other people when they refer to gaslighting as making someone think blank, making someone feel blank.
Right.
The issue I think I would have with that, and the way that just kind of rubs me the wrong way, is because it draws a clear line in the sand as I am the victim.
Right.
They are the perpetrator. And the reason why I feel like that is an obstacle, a big obstacle to overcome, is because then it puts the solution on the other side of that line.
Right.
So I am completely helpless. There's nothing I can do about this. That person needs to change their behavior.
Right.
And in a therapy session, like with you, if you're the therapist and you're dealing with a husband, wife, and one of them identifies as the victim and goes on one side and says, the problem is over there, go work with that person. How does that affect the dynamics of the
It's a non-starter.
therapy?
It's a non-starter. And that's why gaslighting as a phrase is so unhelpful, is because it gives you that victim permission to sort of just lean back and use a shorthand term and blast it on the internet and get a whole bunch of likes and a whole bunch of comments, or people nod their heads or put up some stupid emoji where like, I get it. You know, like I've been gaslighted too. My ex did that to me and blah, blah, blah. And it's like this overly general label that excuses you from all culpability of the other half of the relationship and any dynamic that you have, known or unknown, in your communication, which aids the dysfunctional communication style. So you're right. Like two people are sitting on the couch and person A says, well, she's gaslighting me, man. So go ahead and therapize her. Shrink her, dude. Like, okay. Like, no, I'm going to let me learn how you communicate. Oh, well, he tries to use a decoy when I he talks about Hillary's emails when I try to bring up the kitchen table mail that he leaves all over the place. Okay. That's a logical fallacy, right? We call that a red herring. That's not helpful to the dynamic. John, can you stay on topic? She wants to talk about the kitchen table. I want you to start the next sentence addressing the kitchen table. Go. Do not bring up Hillary. So that's what I'm doing now as a therapist, is I'm modeling and changing and altering the way you communicate and making new rules and being also an independent observer. Because you're right. Like, and that's part of what I think is true behind gaslighting. And again, I hate words that get weaponized, right? So I have beef with this word already. But there is truth behind the feeling.
Yes.
That feeling of powerlessness and that feeling of, am I going crazy? The other person so confidently asserts a reality or a fact or a preposition that I very confidently feel is not true, but because their confidence is bigger than mine, I'm questioning my reality, and it can feel like they are mind controlling me or manipulating me. And I can feel like a victim in that sense. The answer to that is to bring in a third-party observer to come in and not referee things, but be a grounding piece to try to understand what you're both trying to say. Because, Nick, 90% of the time that I've worked with couples, they are both trying to say something and it goes over the other person's head or is misinterpreted by the other person. Mm-hmm. Now, if you ask that other person what just happened, they could easily say, he's just gaslighting me. You know, he's intentionally trying not to understand what I'm saying. Like, one of the things in here was not understanding what I'm saying, playing dumb, which, yeah, that can be a real pathology, playing dumb. But Really? Anytime somebody doesn't get what you're throwing down, they have an illness? You can say they're gaslighting you. They're intentionally, horribly trying with malice to hurt you. Like, no, as a therapist, I know that people are well-intentioned. They approach conversations desiring to have real resolution. And I often have to be the translator between those two sides and help them get to a place where they understand each other. But again, there's an entire field of psychotherapy that deals with this because we are so aware of it as a human problem. And to just encapsulate hundreds of thousands of years of human interrelational conflict into a word and then make it that person's problem is not okay for me. It doesn't work.
And you brought up a couple of really good points, which I want to emphasize, which is that we're not saying that this is all BS and don't know all that. It's real, but the way that we talk about it, for me, that's the big issue, is the dialogue. The way we talk about this is very important because you can go completely the opposite direction and this becomes very victimizing and it moves us away from solving the actual problem.
And so even the article said that. Like at the end of the article, it says, if you feel like you're being gaslighted, you need to get away from that person and burn their phone and burn their number and key their car. And it was like, this is hard for me to read because, earlier I compared it to the phrase emotionally abusive. Back in the day when people would come in and say, I feel like they're emotionally abusive, we didn't discard that. We didn't go, that's not a real term, you're dumb. No, we said, hey, tell me why you feel that way. What is he doing that makes you feel that way? Well, he does X, Y, Z. Okay, good. Now I have stuff.
Now we focus on that.
Let's deal with that. John, do you realize that saying it this way is causing this much pain? Well, no, I don't intend that. I'm just trying to send this message. Okay, great. Now we're doing therapy, right? Now we're getting into the weeds and we're figuring out how to resystem this. But gaslighting is ineffective for me if you just come in and say it as a phrase. So, what Nick just said is absolutely true. We're not dismissing. I'm speak for only me. I'm not dismissing it. The feeling is real. Just like emotionally abused is a feeling that's real.
Right.
It's unhelpful to use that phrase to me because I need to learn what's causing it so I can see the system dynamic.
Yeah. And I think when we talk about this, motive and intent are very important. So here's one paragraph that they have in the article, which I want to read because it kind of made me laugh. So it gives the example. A mother always disapproving of her daughter's decisions to the extent that the daughter questions decisions she suspects her mother would not agree with. The mother may or may not consciously want to control her daughter's every decision, but by being overly critical, she's doing so. So
wow.
So this is the part that didn't make sense to me is what is the mother's motive? I mean, if she's a mom and she's got a teenage daughter and her daughter is now questioning decisions she's making based off of whether or not her mother would agree or not.
Yeah.
That's parenting.
Yeah, right. You're right.
But that's gaslighting. Is that not a good thing? Because as a teenager, that was very important for my developmental. My development was when I make a decision, I think, no, oh wait, before I do this,
what are my parents thinking?
How are my parents going to react to what I'm doing?
Yeah, that's so funny. When I was a kid, do you remember when we were kids, earrings were kind of a hip thing for dudes for a while? Thank you, Will Smith. He's like the thing that made that happen. So I wanted to get one.
I had a magnetic one.
Did you? So that's what I did. Here's the story. So I'd just gotten out of high school and I was like 18 or whatever, and I wanted to get a lip ring actually. And so, because I was into punk and stuff, right? So I'm going to do it. I'm getting brave for it. But I go to Claire's and I buy one of those clip-on earrings, just like a little silver hoop. And so I put it on my lip and I go to dinner with my parents that night. And they're like, what is that? And I'm like, I got a lip ring. I think it looks nice, but, you guys are free to say whatever you think. And so we get through dinner, and they're like, and they're like, well, okay, live a little. I guess it's, not permanent, and all right, it actually looks okay, I guess this is okay. And then I pull it out, and I'm like, it's fake, but thank you, because now I'm going to go get a real one. Now that I know you guys are cool with it, you didn't disown me, I'm going to go get a real one. Then that night, I went and got a real one, because I tested it, and it worked. So I beta tested my idea.
Always the scientist.
Right. So, but it's a good point. So if you're out there and you feel like you're in a dysfunctional relationship, whether that's a romantic one, a parenting one, a family one, a business one, and you feel that somebody else is dominant of you and overpowered in the relationship and causes you to feel insignificant and questioning of your own reality, that to me, I want to address that, not just call it gaslighting and write it off and say poor us. I want to specifically zoom in to the stuff that you're seeing, and I want to address that individually, plank by plank, rather than just wrapping it all up in a big bow and saying, this is called gaslighting, get away from this person, they're abusive. That kind of terminology I think is unhelpful. I think it pushes too far away from solutions.
I think it's polarizing too.
Yes.
Because what ends up happening, they talk a lot in the article about forcing in quotes,
right,
someone to question their perception.
Right.
And then they say bad. And they don't go into any more information in that.
Don't do that.
That's good. I want my perceptions to be questioned. I want to constantly be questioning my perceptions. Anyway, that's my take.
No, I think there's a lot of truth to this, guys. And again, I know I rant about it, but if you're out there and you've identified with this term and this term felt healing for you to have a word to call this, I know what you're going through, and I realize the desire to use that word. And if you were my patient, I certainly wouldn't beat you up for using that word. But you'd notice that I subtly start replacing that word with real words, and I start replacing the things you're identifying with real language that really does effectively capture what's happening in a more generous, spirited way that leans towards solutions. And you'd notice that in our sessions, I never use that term, unless I'm quoting you. So as a therapist, when I hear this article and NBC's like broadcasting this like they discovered the gospel, it's bothersome to me. It's too authoritative. They're wrong, and it doesn't have any bearing in science. So it's problematic. I just don't think it's going to get you towards solutions.
Yeah. All right, well, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we have some listener mail about verbal abuse. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
Do you hate ads in podcasts? So do we. That's why there aren't any in Pod Therapy. But eventually, we'd like to fill this ad space with short messages from real listeners who help sponsor the show. So start thinking about what message you'd want here. Maybe we can read it for you, or maybe you can leave a voicemail and we'll just play that. Either way, Pod Therapy wants to be listener-driven, listener-supported show, and we hope you'll think about filling this space with a personal message for our audience. Thanks for listening. We're back. You're listening to Pod Therapy. Our first listener mail comes to us from Crystal, who writes in about verbal abuse. Hi, Nick and Jim. As you said in an earlier podcast, we've got to keep you motivated. So your podcast would be much better if you answered my question. Good job, Crystal.
I like that.
I suppose my question has many layers, and you may have heard it from my other favorite podcast, Matt and Mattingly's Ice Cream Social. Nice. That's our favorite podcast, too. Besides this one.
No, it's still mine.
I have really tried to use and think about the things you've said about building confidence, but I feel my issues stem from verbal abuse that my dad put me through as a teenager. My dad put a lot of pressure on me to lose weight. He would weigh me every week, and he'd bribe me with things I needed or wanted, and if I didn't lose what he wanted, then he'd yell at me for what felt like hours, while tears streamed down my face. FYI, if you couldn't guess, this gave me depression. Surprisingly, my high school actually caught that I was depressed, and when I took a paper questionnaire about how I felt handed out randomly in class one day, Children's Aid was called and counseling was provided, but it would only get him to back off a bit, and when I took an interest, he would start pushing again. So, not only would it erode my confidence, but also my self-worth. Then I went away to work at Walt Disney World. My dad said that he wouldn't let me come back to live with him if I didn't lose substantial amounts of weight. That didn't happen, and when it came time to come home, he said he'd pick me up from the airport, but that I couldn't live with him. That was about 10 years ago. After that, I didn't speak with him for 6 months until he spoke to me, only because he was getting remarried, so this whole weight situation was never settled with him. Since then, I suppose I've gained more weight and tried to get over the verbal abuse my dad subjected me to. But I've been in and out to see a variety of different therapists and counselors, more free due to me living in Canada, yay. I feel going into my 30s, I have become more confident, but still find it hard, especially since I've finally scored my first official full-time job. And I'm still in my trial period, and I'm struggling a little to meet expectations, which is stressing me out, which makes me feel like my throat is closing up. I also feel insecure around my dad, and I really don't know if it makes sense to even bring it up after all of this time, as well as my dad is dealing with his father succumbing to dementia, which is hard for both of us. I feel like I've been able to let go of most of the blame for the way he treated me, but I also feel like regardless of all the work I've put in, it all hurts and is still somewhere beneath the surface. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and any suggestions that you have. Crystal.
Wow. Well, thanks, Crystal, for writing in.
Yeah.
First off, that's terrible. I'm sorry you had to go through that. That can be very frustrating, very difficult to go through. Yeah. So I think, as far as my feedback with that, whether or not to approach this with your father, my take on this, and again, with Jim having the background with families, I'm interested to hear kind of his take on this, but I'm always a big fan of addressing it within yourself first, finding your own peace, working on your own issues, and you coming to terms with this and you having peace with this first before working on it with him and dealing with that in that kind of dynamic and trying to repair the relationship. My reasoning behind that is because just for me personally, I like to have the solution on my side of the court. I want to have control of the solution. I want to have influence over me getting better. I don't want to put me getting better into the hands of someone else. And that would be my fears if you were to address this with him right now when you haven't really fully addressed it within yourself. I would be afraid that you would be going into that with the expectation that I will feel better when he does X, Y, and Z. When he apologizes, then that's going to be my road to healing. That makes me nervous because I wouldn't want to see you put your road to healing in the hands of him apologizing because he just may not be at that point. He may not see anything that he did wrong. And plus, with what he's going through with his father, it just may not be something he's ready to deal with. So I applaud you for getting involved in therapy.
Yeah.
And I guess another thing that I'm kind of hearing you talk about too is how this has affected various areas of your life. And I see this with a lot of people I've worked with too, where because of abuse that they've gone through, because of some of this trauma that they've experienced, it affects how they perceive situations they're currently in. So in your specific example of just getting your first full-time job, still being in that trial period, yeah, your perceptions, you may be, overly critical of yourself just because you grew up in that environment where you were constantly being criticized.
Yeah, I think that there's A, that, and B, I guess I want to say a couple of things on this. The first is to Crystal and also to the wider audience. So I'm currently above the weight that I know I should be at. I probably need to drop about, if I'm honest, probably about 40 pounds to get to what the internet says would be the right BMI. And I just want the internet to be wrong. It's funny, I came back from a doctor's appointment once, and my wife's like, hey, did you ask the doctor, about your weight? And I was like, yeah, my BMI is off. And she goes, oh, yeah, what did he say? And I said, he says I'm too short. So need to get taller. Then it won't be a problem.
Cognitive reframing.
That's
I
right.
like that.
Yeah. The problem isn't the weight. The problem is I need to just add a couple inches to the top
There
and
you
I'll
go.
be great. So just wear some high heels. But, to this point of how weight works, and this is something that I want everybody to think about for a second. On this show, we talk a lot about addiction, and we talk about alcoholism, drug addiction. And we're going to talk about that later in the show, too. And we talk about how we can develop these unhealthy patterns or obsessive and compulsive ways of living. One of the areas of our lives that I think scoots underneath the radar is our dependence and our emotional connection to food. And that seems so simple, and it seems like a dumb thing. Like, oh, come on, Jim, talk about the heavy stuff. Talk about the stuff you learn about in grad school. I get that. But this is going to be the area that affects most of our health. Mm-hmm. Heart disease is killing us. Diabetes is killing us. There's cancers that are killing us that are routed to what we're eating. And guys, I am the chief offender. I have nothing to brag about. Trust me. At this table, Nick is the healthy one. But I'll tell you that I've been really reflecting lately on my own emotional connection to food and in how I will try to self-medicate with it. And we have another episode called Emotional Eating where we talk about this. But, Crystal, when I look at your story and I see so much sadness and I see so much brokenness and I see so much being beat up on, ironically, for weight, The great irony is that you're going to tend to reinforce the negative as you self-medicate and self-placate and treat yourself so that you can overcome this. So if you're out there and you notice that you really struggle with weight, and diets are being failed, you've tried to lose weight and you've been unsuccessful, and you can't stick with it, and you tend to go back into patterns that you wish you wouldn't and that you've resolved not to. What's interesting about that, Nick, is that you're checking most of the boxes for addiction right there. That's almost all the 4 C's or 5 C's. The craving cycle is there, the continuous use, the chronic use despite consequences, the inability to cut back. It's all there. So, friends, I would challenge you to do what I'm doing, which is to begin a food journal and start asking yourself, what do I eat and when do I eat it and what was going on in my life? And start to punctuate, when did I eat, why did I eat, and what was I feeling? Because that's the thing we forget to take a look at. But the stomach is the second mind. And it really has a lot to do with how I'm feeling and what I'm living whenever I make my food choices. And I'm not taking a shot at you. I'm just saying you clearly describe a history of trauma and verbal abuse and emotional pain and simultaneously a struggle with weight. And I don't think those are two different things. I think those things live together.
I would agree. I mean, because there's a lot of people that becomes the number one coping skill.
Yes.
It's that comfort food, right? Food it's such a big part of our culture. It gets associated with everything that we do. And it kind of reminds us of simpler times. If I can go back and eat mom's spaghetti, it reminds me of that time and I feel comfortable again. So it's easy to retreat back to that. As far as myself and for, actually, I mean, I'm one of those weird people where because of my genetics or whatever, my issue was always gaining weight.
Oh, okay.
So that's what was really weird is I can relate a little bit in the sense of having pressure to change weight.
Okay.
Because I had more pressure to gain weight if I was going to be an athlete.
Okay.
Come on, you gotta work out, you gotta eat healthy, you've got to
Okay.
And I've had that from a couple people in my life, but the ironic thing is that once they just completely stopped, then I started doing it.
Right.
Because it has to be something that's motivated internally. It's got to be something that you choose to do, and you got to get over that hump. I've now been pretty active in lifting weights and eating healthy. I'm coming up on a year now of doing this.
It's been consistent. Yeah.
And there was that part where it was a change, where it was like, I'm doing this and it's something that's different, but then now I feel like I don't think about it anymore because now it's just how I live. This is just what I do.
Right.
It's no longer something I'm actively trying to do. This is what I do.
This
is me.
Second nature. Right? And that's whenever you see the biggest gains, I think.
Yeah. But I think going back to this, so I guess what I'm hearing you say, Jim, is that we've got to work on healthy coping. If this is something that you're going to work through, finding replacement coping skills, finding just being aware of how food was part of the coping. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
I think that the one thing that I would challenge that I see all the time on TV is right around in December we talk about New Year's, right? And everybody starts getting those New Year's resolutions and you start seeing the gym commercials like crazy. I believe the two places that you lose weight are in the kitchen. I think it's more about what you're putting in, not necessarily what you're sweating out, but also in a therapist's office. And a lot of people don't add that dimension. Weight loss is more a mental game than anything else. The thing that stops you from losing weight or the thing that causes you to put on more weight is not your muscle mass. It's your mind. It's the most important muscle in your body. Mm-hmm. So I think that that's a big part of this. And when I hear Crystal talking about pursuing some therapeutic options, I believe that is a huge moment, and I really want to congratulate and push forward on that. But, Nick, I also want to have a word with the dad. If you're out there and you're a parent, I'm a parent, I hear the story, and there's a part of me that even though this father is wrong, and what he did is not okay, it is neglect, it is abandonment, it is hurtful, it is not helpful, and it's really close to the word abusive. Mm-hmm. I get what a parent is thinking. Because they're thinking, I'm not going to reward unhealthy behavior. If we replaced weight with alcohol, if he was saying you're a drunk, you overdrink, you drink all the time, I don't like being in your presence knowing that this is part of you, and you are not welcome in my home until I see substantial change in your behavior pattern that no longer indicates drinking. we would probably be taking a different approach right now. We'd be saying, hey, good job, Dad. Way to not enable, way to draw the boundary, way to do that. And I can see where some people would make the argument, why is weight any different, Nick? Because weight's going to kill this person too, just like the alcohol, and there's an addiction cycle there. And their dad's drawing the line. I want to speak to that because I realize as a parent that there's a desire to do good work here. And this is going to be a complicated thing, but if you are a parent and you're trying to address your child's weakness or an area that you would like them to improve, and you're doing that with removal of yourself, neglect, not watering good ideas, just denying attention, affection, and presence, I'm going to challenge you to think through that carefully. There are times when that is the appropriate tool to use. And as an addiction specialist, Nick's nodding his head because he's thinking of a million times when that's the right thing to do. But when it comes to food stuff, food, body image, weight, these are different because it's not quite as external as grabbing a substance and putting it inside of me. It has to do with my self-image. It has to do with who I am. It's what I shop. It's what I wear. It's what I look like. And because that's so much more incarnate to the human, we end up with these body dysmorphic disorders where because you are shaming the human, because you are trying to solicit change with this aggressive and assertive or negligent and abusive sort of way, the verbal abuse, the hurtfulness, the combative words, the weaponizing of terms, you ultimately don't push them towards success. It has this ironic double negative effect where it backfires and they go back to coping the way they know how,
right? Which
apparently was abusive eating, right? And so if you're a parent out there and you're struggling with this in your own child's life, I tell you this. I had a person come in. He had a son who was like probably about 8 or 9. His son was overweight. And he was saying, I tell him not to eat this stuff. We tell him not to do this. And we tell him not to play the video games, but he still does it, or he, does nothing. And we take away the video games, we take away the food, and he just sits there and mopes. And I said, what are you replacing it with?
Yes.
And they were like, well, nothing. We're telling him not to do it. I'm like, okay, so meet them halfway, right? Because this is your child. So just pulling yourself away and being combative and offering only negative feedback is not as productive as coming in with educational alternatives and saying, hey, tonight, let's go out, let's go to the salad bar. Why don't we hit that together? Hey, I'm going to a nutritional seminar. I thought maybe you could come with me. Let's do this together. Like, let's replace bad ideas with good ideas, and then let's do it as a team. That's a very different form of parenting. That's coaching. That's running with them, not just punching them in the back of the head every time they're wrong.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I thought that was good. I don't really have anything else to add. I think you nailed it.
But it's a whole different way of how you train somebody, right?
Yeah.
And so I see the dad's motives in this, but Dad, if you're listening, you're wrong. You're wrong. What you're doing is causing permanent emotional damage. You are devastating your child. And the entire premise of your behavior is that you love your child and it's hard to watch them be unhealthy. And I get that. And as a father, I understand that frustration. But I'm going to tell you right now, what you're doing is backfiring. It is not causing results. It is not getting you closer. It's causing further damage. And that's going to only wound Crystal deeper. The right action is to make amends, to come together, and to try this conversation in a different way. And you know what? I got to tell you something. At the end of the day, if my child is abusing a drug or committing felonies, there's problems with that, and I may have to remove myself so that they can change because I don't want to enable them. But as a parent, you're one of the only people in your child's life that is supposed to give them unconditional love. And as a human, your psychology is dependent on somebody in your life loving you no matter what. Dad, there are plenty of men out there that are already shaming Crystal. She needs you to be the one man who doesn't. There's plenty of men out there that are making little jokes. There's plenty of women out there that are taking shots at her. There's plenty of websites and television shows and magazine articles that are constantly every day barraging her and reminding her that she's not good enough. You need to be the one person in her life who she can depend on to look at her and see his daughter and not the size of her waistline. And so dad to dad, I'm going to tell you right now, when you're raising a girl, when you're raising a child, that's your first job. If you're doing that, the rest we'll figure out together. But start with unconditional love.
Well, thanks for writing in, Crystal. Hope that helps.
Yeah, hang in there, girl. You're doing awesome.
All right, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we are asked to weigh in on a family quarrel. This should be fun. You're listening to Pod Therapy. Hey, TheraPals, have you purchased your tickets to Scoop Fest 2018? Our friends Matt, Paul, and Jacob are working really hard putting together their 3rd annual weekend-long comedy and podcast festival in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada.
Las Vegas.
October 12th, 13th, and 14th.
When is that again, Nick?
October 12th, 13th, and 14th, unless you want to purchase the VIP, which is on the 11th, which Jim and I will be there. This is going to be awesome.
The VIP package is going to be nuts.
Yep. Tournament of Kings. It's going to be awesome. So enjoy live comedy, variety shows, the Scoop Talent Show, the Jock versus Nerd Costume Ball, which I know...
it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I can't wait to see Jim's outfit.
Oh, yeah.
And much, much more, including live recordings of Matt Mattingly's Ice Cream Social, Pod Therapy, Penn Sunday School, and a whole bunch of other really awesome podcasts. Mm-hmm. And guess what? Our listeners get $40 off the ticket price.
What? That's awesome.
Right. So go to heyscoops.com/therapy, and that will be the discount. So please check that out. heyscoops.com/therapy. Yes.
We're back. You're listening to Pod Therapy, and our next listener writes in about diseases versus mental illness.
Hey guys, so it's a divided household over here on whether addiction is a disease or mental illness. Also, curious on your thoughts about intimacy anorexia. Thanks.
Okay, this is a good one because this person wrote in because I saw a debate she was having on Facebook, and she's a fan of the show, and so we saw her thread, and she had this whole debate going on Facebook where 2 different sides were weighing in, debating about whether or not addiction is a disease. And I commented and said, if you want Nick and I to talk about this, we're totally willing to. And she was like, hell yes. And so she turned this into a question. She added the intimacy anorexia. But Nick, we have heard this question a million times, and it's not an easy answer, but there is an answer to this.
Disease.
It's a disease.
As certain as climate change and evolution by natural selection.
Okay, wow. So
if you're into science,
stand.
It's disease.
So, but
here's the other thing, though, too.
Right? Because it's unlike other diseases, right?
Well,
because
right.
If you have leukemia, right, that happened to you. We all pity you. Whenever you're addicted to heroin and you're destroying your life, there's a part of me as a human that wants to notice the part of the equation you play in this, right?
Well, sure.
Okay, so
but
help
that
us
doesn't
understand,
necessarily not make it a disease.
Help us understand why it's still a disease.
Okay. Well, first, I want to get just kind of a brief explanation of kind of the dopamine process and everything, how that works.
Okay.
So
dopamine
just really quick. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter. It's the thing, when we experience pleasure, that's what we're experiencing. We're experiencing a rush of dopamine. Our brain has to be able to communicate to us that certain things that we do for survival are good and we should do those more.
Like having sex is pleasurable. Yes. Nature wants us to do that.
Yes.
So it rewards it.
So it's almost kind of like our brain is training us like we would train a dog. Okay. Oh, you did something I really like. Here's a treat.
Okay.
Do more of that.
Okay.
Eating is the same way.
Yeah.
If I go hiking, I get that rush of endorphins. I get a little bit of a dopamine rush, right? So it's exercise. It's something really good.
The body wants you to do it
again. How does the brain know, or how do I know that eating food I need to do for survival, hiking I don't need to do for survival.
Okay.
Yet they're both reinforced with dopamine. Well, I know that based off of the level of dopamine. I get more dopamine from eating food, less from hiking.
Which is why sex is exciting, and we talk about it as orgasm and explosive and euphoric, is because it's pouring dopamine in your brain. Because it's yes, do that again.
Yes,
so the species will survive.
Our species can survive. Yes. Okay. So if I go 2 days without hiking and 2 days without eating food, which am I going to crave?
Right.
I will crave the one that gave me the greater amount of dopamine. Okay. So this whole system is beautifully set up for survival. Now, when we throw in drugs and alcohol or psychoactive substance, what it's actually doing is it's artificially kind of hijacking this part of the brain, mostly in the limbic system. And what it does is it mimics that same effect. So it's a substance that comes in from the outside that gives us that same result, but it's not like the rush you get from food. It's way higher.
Right.
It reinforces it at a much, much higher level.
You hacked the system.
Yes. You found a way to hack the system.
Broke the ATM, and now it's spitting out $100 bills.
Right, which is why when we worked at the rehab facility, we were getting people in there who hadn't eaten in days, sometimes even weeks.
Right.
And we're like, how in the hell can they do this? Because if given the choice between their drug of choice or food, they're going to choose the drug because that's the kind of craving. So when we have somebody who is craving a substance that they haven't used in a long time, I got somebody who's been using heroin and they haven't used in a few days, and they're craving it, it's not like the way I crave Dunkin' Donuts.
Right.
Right? It's something way more intense.
It's almost unimaginable. If you've not been a drug addict, if you've not had that, it's almost unimaginable to imagine what it's like. The closest thing I remember in a lecture once, I heard a great speaker saying, did you realize that each of us is chemically dependent right now? And if I withdraw you from your chemical long enough, you will go through withdrawal symptoms. And we were like, what are you talking about? And he was like, you're chemically dependent on a substance called H2O, dihydrogen monoxide, right? Water. And he was saying withdrawal symptoms of water include dry mouth, dry throat, confusion, irritability, sleepiness, death. Yeah. And, he was going through all the different things. He's saying, if I cause you to have great thirst, you would kill a man to get a bottle of water. It will come down to that because your body so craves it and you are so delusional, you need it because your brain goes into survival mode. And I guess, Nick, that's kind of what I hear you saying is the addiction disease concept emerges because the brain enters into an autopilot kind of mode where it craves and seeks in an almost primitive reptilian kind of way. Right.
And so where the disease concept comes into play then is the fundamental changes in the brain that occur once the person becomes addicted to it. Okay. So there's actual changes that do occur within the structure of the brain in this rewards pathway in the limbic system. Okay. So receptors, dopamine receptors in the neurons kind of start to turn off.
Right.
Right. So now all of a sudden you have to use more and more and you're not getting that same effect.
Right.
Right.
And that causes that loop where it starts to get
Yes.
You started with smoking a joint, but now you need a lot. Or you started with a beer, and now you need whiskey. Or you started with smoking heroin or taking pills, and now you're shooting heroin.
Right.
It's more concentrated.
So now let's look at the other part of this too, which is the genetic part, which people are going to be like, genetic? What are you talking about? This is a behavior. You've chosen to do this. Yes and no. So there is a genetic component. So interesting study that was done with alcohol several decades ago. They were looking at children the biological children of alcoholics were 4 times as likely as the general population to develop alcoholism later in life.
Yeah.
Okay, but that doesn't tell us anything. That doesn't tell us if that's nature or nurture. Where we really got the information was looking at adoption studies. Oh. So the biological children of alcoholics who were adopted out and raised by non-alcoholics were still 4 times as likely as the general population to develop alcoholism.
Wow.
So we learn that there's a genetic component that's involved. So part of that we believe is the number of dopamine receptors on the neurons.
Okay. But again, it's like, and this is what I hear you saying in that, because I remember this on Her Debate. People were saying there's a genetic link, and people were like, dude, that's a cop-out. And I think that it comes down to this. There's a genetic predisposition, right?
Right.
So like I might be genetically predisposed to lung cancer, but if I never start smoking cigarettes, I do not increase my likelihood to get that.
All right, so here's my cup example. So let's say Jim has a cup in front of him. It's a red Solo cup.
Yeah.
And I've got a cup in front of me, and mine is a shot glass.
Okay.
Okay. The cups represent our genetics.
Okay.
When the cup overflows, that represents addiction.
Okay.
So you and I, let's say we graduate high school, we go to college together, and we're going to start pouring water into this cup. Right. And we drink the same amount, we drink the same substances, we drink the same times, and we're pouring at the same rate. Right. Which one of our cups is going to overflow first?
The shot glass.
Mine.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is the genetic predisposition to alcoholism. I'm starting off with a smaller cup.
Right.
So if Jim has no history of alcoholism, can he become an alcoholic? Absolutely.
Right.
But he's just going to have to work at it.
So it's a disease we can all get. We're predisposed to it at different
diabetes,
levels. Right.
All of that. All of that has a factor. Part of that factor is your lifestyle.
Right.
The choices. Just because I choose to eat Big Macs every day and all that, that doesn't mean that if I get heart disease, that it's not a disease because I made choices.
Good point. Yeah. And you could be predisposed to it. And another thing, too, to step into this question, So the first thing is this. When people ask us, is this a disease? Is it a choice? And her question was, is it a disease or a mental illness?
That's the part I didn't really quite understand.
I think I still knew what she was saying. She was asking, is it a choice or is it another thing, right? And it's because to us, disease and mental illness are the same concept, just different words.
My answer to that is yes.
Yes, yeah, this is both. But here's another way I've heard it phrased, and I want to back this up. I've heard it phrased, addiction is a disease of choice. In the same way that diabetes is often a disease of choice. It isn't always. There's juvenile diabetes. In the same way that lung cancer can be a disease of choice. In the same way that heart cancer can be. In the same way that an STD, a sexually transmitted disease, is a disease of choice. Like, you probably went and put yourself in positions where you could get that. But what's interesting about addiction, we go back to that shot glass metaphor. Most Americans have drank. Right? Most Americans have dabbled in a recreational substance. The numbers are huge. There was just another study released I saw online in a link you sent me where something to the effect of like 70% of high school seniors admit to having tried a recreational substance. Right. So if 70% of our American population is trying things and 10% of them have shot glass sized abilities and the rest of them have solo cups, then we start blaming all the people that end up with addiction. We're like, you shot glassers, this wouldn't have happened if you hadn't chosen. Yeah, but the rest of us did that too. It's just, it wasn't a problem, right? And so like we need to at least approach it with that generosity of understanding that this is complicated. And when Nick and I treat this, we tend to teach our patients, we call this a biopsychosocial illness. Biological in the sense of the solo cup example, and craving, which is another biological example. Neurology, that's a biological example. We also describe it as psychological because we know that this replaces coping skills in your life. It becomes an emotional substitute in your life. It also has to do with trauma in your life. There's lots of things that get added to the mix. Mm-hmm. And then we also call it sociological in the sense that where you live, the environment that you come from, the people you come from, the nurture side of it also has an effect. So it is a disease. It's also a very complicated one that involves every aspect of the person. This is why we can't just give you a pill and fix addiction. It's why we can't just put you in a bed for 30 days and fix addiction. It's why we have to change your whole life to fix addiction because it's a disease that emerges from every aspect of your life.
Much the same way as heart disease. So heart disease, you can prescribe a medication for that, but ultimately what it really boils down to is you're going to have to change your lifestyle.
Right. That's a big part of it too. So the other piece of this question was about intimacy anorexia. So this is another one of those terms, kind of like gaslighting, where it's a made-up term, but its desire is to capture a behavior that we don't have a word for. So intimacy anorexia is whenever you withhold the so-called nourishing intimacy of emotional connection or sexual connection with your mate or with others because you don't feel like that's what you want or you feel like it's not for you, right? So in the same way that you might decline food to the point where you are malnourished, and now we're saying, hey, this is anorexic behavior, the question is there such a thing as intimacy anorexia, where you're withholding the nourishment of sexual or emotional connection from others to the point where you are malnourished and underserved? Yes, there is such a thing as like poor boundaries, and there is such a thing as like emotional avoidance and commitment fatigue and fear, of all these things. Or there is such a thing as asexuality too. I have only heard intimacy anorexia described in the books that describe sex addiction. Because in sex addiction, we talk about how you were blowing yourself up with this addiction, right? But then whenever you're healthy again, unlike alcohol where you're supposed to just never drink again, and that's what sobriety looks like, sexual sobriety usually looks like a balanced sexual lifestyle that is appropriate and within your boundaries of what you want. Intimacy anorexia is usually something I'll see recovering sex addicts describe where they say, I'm just avoiding everything. I'm abstinent and I'm undernourished and I'm unhappy and I'm unhealthy. And so I've kind of gone from being way too indulgent and hedonistic in my sexuality to being way too austere and abstinent in my sexuality. And that's where I've seen it discussed. Mm-hmm. And, obviously, yes, I would agree that's a thing. I approach it with a sense of balance, that all things can be brought into balance as long as we understand it in a healthy context for ourselves. But that's exhausting in relationships, too, when somebody's completely pulling away from you and has nothing to give you. that's hard. So, to the writer, intimacy anorexia is a real thing in the sense that I know what you mean by that. It's not, of course, a mental health word that we'll use, though we understand the intention of it. And if somebody's out there and they find that they pull away from relationships, they decline to bring nourishing emotional or sexual attention to their mates, that is something I want you to get therapy for, because it says a lot about what your fears are, what your trauma history is. It could be as simple as you are asexual, and asexual just is no sex drive. And that's an official and fair place to be as a human. You're not broken for that. That could just be a legitimate place that you live in. But I would encourage self-exploration, because if somebody's describing you as anorexic in intimacy, it probably means that there's a dysfunctional relationship and people are not very happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for writing in.
Yes, thank you for writing in. So a couple of apologies and thank yous, something to throw out there. Just a quick reminder, if you write in and you put your name at the end of the email, we will read your first name. If there is no name at the end of the email, we will keep it anonymous. Or if you tell us to keep it anonymous, we will. Which leads us to an apology that I think Nick would like to say.
Sorry.
Nick would like to apologize to a listener.
A listener who I said her name and she did not give us
What was her name, Nick?
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Because what was actually funny, she wasn't too upset about it. So to our listener, thanks for being a good sport.
Yeah.
Plus we butchered the name so bad that it wasn't even recognizable.
Yeah. Luckily we're bad at reading.
Any name over one syllable, we're going to screw it up.
Yeah. Always write in as Bob.
Yeah. Who's this Bob?
Bob's got problems. Yeah. So Nick is sorry, but Jim did nothing wrong. Let the record show.
Yeah, whatever. And a big thank you to Linda for giving us an awesome review on Facebook. Linda writes, Pod Therapy is a wonderful addition to my podcast roster. Jim and Nick are two therapists who deliver real-life advice to real-life listeners with all the heart, humor, and warmth you may not expect from a therapy podcast. Aww. These guys are such a pleasure to listen to, and it's fun to learn about mental health from this weekly dose of Pod Therapy.
Linda, that was awesome.
That was very sweet.
Gosh, that's needs to be on if we ever cut an album, that's the quote that's going on the back of the album right there. So if you would like your review to be read live on air, make sure that you go to iTunes and drop us a 5-star review, 4 stars or less, and we'll just ignore your existence. And, or go to Facebook, facebook.com/podtherapy, and toss us a review, guys. We really appreciate it. It helps other people learn about what we're trying to do here and further the mission of mental health. So go be a TheraPal and give us a review.
And let us know who your favorite host is.
Yeah, and it's spelled Jim. Don't spell it wrong. That's all the time that we've got for this week's session. Thank you to those who contributed to our show today. We really appreciate it. Remember, pod therapy isn't something you should keep all to yourself. Help us reach others by sharing this episode. You can help us by going to facebook.com/podtherapy or on Twitter @PodTherapyGuys.
Do you want to add your own advice to today's questions? Post your thoughts at podtherapy.net and join the conversation. I'm Nick Tangeman.
I'm Gaslighting Nick Tangeman.
Thanks, and we'll see you for your appointment next week.